During my senior year of high school, my life took a dramatic turn. John, my father, who was distraught, grabbed my shoulder as I came home from school, raising his voice in panic. He rushed to the hospital, and there I saw my mother, connected to all sorts of machines. She had 3 months to live. Those were the words the doctor told us. My name is John. I'm 32, single, and I don't have a girlfriend. Since my mother passed away from cancer, it's just been my father and me, living freely. My mother, having been given a 3-month prognosis, ended up living quite a bit longer than that. I think it was all thanks to my father. My mother had a setback at one point, but managed to rally and gained back some strength. And she hadn't realized she had cancer until then, and I think the mental shock of it all was pretty severe. She was young and the disease progressed quickly. By the time we found out, it was already too late. After giving it a lot of thought, my father decided to move back to Hudson, my mother's hometown, for palliative care. The hometown was rich in nature, a couple of states away from where we were living at the time. He started farming, using his old connections, bringing the vegetables he grew to my mother, creating peaceful times for us. Being back in her hometown seemed to make my mother happy, and whether that was the reason or not, she was able to spend 3 years in the palliative care ward. Even after my mother passed away, my father stayed in the countryside, continuing to farm. He says farming suits him, and he seems happy, living with the memories of my mother. Now, at Casile, I'm back in the state where we originally lived, working, but I visit my father frequently. It's a 2-hour drive on the freeway. I got my driver's license in the countryside, and driving has become a hobby of mine, so I always enjoy the trip. But my father is concerned about isn't himself, though it's me. Every time I visit him, he asks, "John, have you found yourself a girlfriend yet?" When I dodge the question, he always sighs in disappointment. Well, he has a point. I'm 32 this year, and I'd like to show my father my own kids. But the thing is, I just don't have any opportunities to meet someone right now. Someone please introduce me to a girl. As I was thinking this, a matchmaking opportunity fell in. A prominent client suddenly approached me, suggesting me to give it a try. At word, this client, Mr. Smith, is a down-to-earth guy who doesn't flaunt his status and has always looked out for me. But with such a sudden proposal, I couldn't help but be suspicious. He's showing me her photo and assuring me that we'd get along. He convinced me to meet her. On the day of the matchmaking, my father came out from the countryside, and we headed to the hotel where we were supposed to meet. I couldn't fit into my old suit, so I had to buy a new one. My father said, laughing. Both of us were nervous, and we arrived way earlier than the scheduled time. Later, my matchmaking partner and her parents arrived, and as we all took our seats and exchanged greetings, her father spoke up without a word of hello. I'm an elite civil servant, and this is my daughter's matchmaking. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions to see if you're suitable? Did he just call himself an elite? I swallowed the words that were about to slip out, and I could see my father making the same face next to me. Actually, this wasn't a formal matchmaking. It was just an introduction facilitated by someone we knew. We only knew each other's names and faces without any details like workplace, educational background, or hobbies listed on the so-called marriage resume. So it makes sense that they would want to know more about me. I knew beforehand that my matchmaking partner was a regular office worker, and that her father was a civil servant, but an elite civil servant. What's that all about? More than anything, I didn't like the condescending attitude of her father. Suddenly, the matchmaking partner and her mother started reprimanding. "Hey, Dad, that's rude." However, the father wouldn't stop. "What are you talking about? I'm just asking the obvious questions here. So what do you do for a living? And while you're at it, tell me about your father's job too." Action. I was getting irritated by the condescending attitude of her father, but I suppressed my anger and answered, "I work in it. My father is a farmer in the countryside." Option. Before I could finish, the father interrupted me. "A farmer? Let me finish my story for once." I tried to continue, but the father wouldn't stop. "And what about your education? Which university did you graduate from?" I was momentarily at a loss for words. I had moved to the countryside in my 3rd year of high school and ended up dropping out. My father had suggested that I transfer schools, considering my future, but if we had the money for that. I wanted it to be spent on my mother's medical expenses, so I declined. Therefore, my highest level of education is high school dropout. When I honestly said that I was a high school dropout, the father started laughing in a mocking manner. That the farmer's son and a high school dropout. I came here thinking this was a recommendation from Mr. Smith, but what a joke. "My daughter is out of your league. Just leave." At those words, my father started to stand up, and my matchmaking partner and her mother glared at her father. But I stopped my father and smiled. "I don't mind, but are you sure about this?" As soon as I said that, the father suddenly got angry. "What do you mean by that? Mr. Smith thought we'd be a good match and introduced us. Are you sure it's okay to look down on me without understanding why?" As I spoke, the father glared at me, but I ignored him and looked at my matchmaking partner. "You're Alicia, right? We went to the same high school." "Yes. The reason I agreed to this matchmaking was because I knew the other party." "It's you, John, isn't it?" Asha also said happily. "Alicia and I were classmates in high school. Sweet Pindy was to the portion. We were in different departments, but we were in the same club and got along. We had lost touch after I suddenly moved away, but back then we were friends who hung out together a lot, including other buddies. I heard her name from Mr. Smith and saw her picture, and I realized who she was, but I was half in doubt because Alicia, who was bright, kind, and popular, couldn't possibly be still single. But when I met her today, I was sure, and remembered what Alicia was worried about at that time. Asha's father, listening to our conversation, was getting angry. "Hey, Alicia, what is this about?" Asha answered in an annoyed tone. "I told you, he's my high school classmate. We used to be close. Hey, can you just go home now? Dad? I was taken aback by her words. Asha's father, of course, was furious. You're coming home with me too? Em's a farmer's parent and a high school dropout son. What a joke. Why did Mr. Smith introduce such a person? This is what I hate about you, Boathound. Thanks to you. I'm still single at this age. Besides, he dropped out of high school for a reason. No matter what the reason is a dropout. It's all about educational background in this society. From an elite's perspective like mine, a high school dropout is just unthinkable. Graduating from college is a given. A high school dropout can't possibly make a decent living. How much more does he need to look down on me to be satisfied? Just as I was about to argue back, Asha's mother, who had been silent until now, slammed her hand on the table. I've told you not to judge people by their educational background. What's with that attitude? What makes you so great? You just got into a private college because your parents paid for it. And you're only at your current job because of your parents' connections. Your parents might be admirable, but there's nothing about you that I can respect. I was surprised by her sudden outburst, but indeed, that's what Alicia had said before. She was embarrassed to be around her father because he always looked down on others. That was what Alicia was worried about back then. I wondered what kind of person they would be, but meeting them like this, it's clear they are just as I'd heard. Asha confronts her stunned father, questioning him. That's right. I've been telling you to stop that attitude, didn't I? I told you the same thing yesterday. Why do you always get in my way? Get in your way? I'm thinking of your happiness. How does putting down others contribute to my happiness? The happiest thing for me right now is for you to leave this place immediately. What are you saying? I didn't raise a daughter to talk like that. I don't remember being raised by you either. I appreciate that you provided money, but you've never done anything fatherly for me. Mom took care of everything because you were always cheating and hardly ever came home. I was so shocked by her words that I instinctively tried to stop Alicia. Hey, Alicia, calm down a bit. But Alicia wouldn't stop. Her mother nodded in agreement, glaring at her father. Suddenly, her father started to panic. Where did you hear that from? No, that's not it. He's thinking his daughter and wife were unaware. He suddenly took out his smartphone, fumbling with it as he spoke. I need to take a work call. I'm leaving first. He told an obvious lie and left the table hastily. At once her father was gone. Alicia and her mother expressed their deep apologies towards us. My father, stunned at first, quickly stood up and said, "Please don't worry about it." He patted my shoulder. If my son is good enough for Alicia, please at least consider speaking with him. Wait. Seeing my father's reaction, I couldn't help but laugh, and Alicia joined in. After that, Alicia and I talked about the past and present, and I took the plunge to ask her out. Actually, I had liked her since high school. I was afraid of being teased, so I never said anything. I was hoping to at least tell her when we graduated, but I moved away before I could. Busha accepted with a smile, and we started dating with marriage in mind. I explained the situation to Mr. Smith, who had arranged the meeting. Just as I heard, her father is a bit hard to accept. I had been told beforehand that her father was a rude man, but that she was a good person. 6 months later, I gave Alicia an engagement ring, and we started moving towards marriage. But before that, she asked me a small favor. I headed to Alicia's parents' house. Her mother welcomed me in, and her father was there as well. As usual, her father glared at me upon seeing my face. "You must have said something to Mr. Smith, didn't you? Thanks to you, people at work are talking behind my back. How do you, a middle school dropout, even know Mr. Smith? He works at the Department of Agriculture." You can't casually talk to someone like that. There's no way you can make my daughter happy. I won't let you marry her. Her father, who claimed to be an elite government employee, turned out to be a window-side worker at the city's agriculture promotion department. His attitude was the same with everyone, which had earned him a bad reputation. But to this incident, his workplace found out about his affairs, and he was being looked down upon, but it was his own fault. I was berated, but I stood my ground. Mr. Smith told me there was an issue with your attitude. Also, you didn't even listen to us during the matchmaking meeting. I studied robotics in high school's mechanical department. I dropped out in my senior year to take care of my sick mother, but now I'm working in agricultural. My father is a farmer, but he used to work at the Department of Agriculture, and Mr. Smith was his boss. But surely even now, as we develop our smart farming business together, we still keep in touch with Mr. Smith. Her father was surprised and looked at me. I spoke firmly. Just so you know, even though I'm a high school dropout, I have a sufficient income to live with Alicia. Plus, I have your wife's permission for the marriage, so I'm not seeking your approval. At that, her father flew into a rage. You must be joking. If I don't approve, Alicia will not be getting married. Her mother then brought forward a piece of paper. It was a divorce paper. Upon seeing it, her father, of course, started yelling. What are you thinking? The reason Alicia wanted me to accompany her today was for this. Her mother wanted to divorce him. My mother-in-law was apparently forced into an arranged marriage. She had no choice but to turn a blind eye to her husband's infidelity. She endured it all to ensure her daughter didn't face any hardships. It seemed she was worried that being a single parent might disadvantage her daughter in marriage once she reached adulthood. Well, in reality, even Alicia mentioned that it might have been better if her father hadn't been around. Anyway, since Alicia's marriage was arranged and there was no longer a need, a more significant revelation came to light. Finally, she decided on a divorce. I stood in for my mother-in-law and confronted my father-in-law. Your wife has evidence of your affair and has consulted a lawyer. It's about time you set her free. Shut up, you're an outsider. Besides, if you get divorced, how are you going to survive? You've never really worked, and you can't possibly live on your own. You should spend your life serving me. Everyone in the room sighed at his arrogant attitude, and I spoke up. Don't worry, your wife already has a job lined up. And considering the alimony and the money she spent on your affair, she's going to receive a substantial amount of money. So it looks like she won't have to worry about her livelihood for a while. It seems he had been lavishing gifts on his mistress for a long time, but recently it was revealed that he even bought her a car. My mother-in-law had had enough. Naturally, the lawyer mentioned that they would deduct that amount from the property division. My mother-in-law handed him the divorce papers again. If you don't sign them right now, I'll report everything to your parents. What will you do? At that moment, my father-in-law turned pale. It seems that even with his abusive behavior, he couldn't stand up to his parents. His parents found out it would affect his job, which was practically handed to him through connections. By the way, he had boasted about being an elite civil servant, but he was just a local government employee. But the real elites were his parents. He had no real ability and had been living off his parents' reputation. However, as long as his parents are still alive, he'd come this far without any trouble. But he had to face the consequences now. I handed him a pen in silence. He bowed his head and began to sign. My mother-in-law accepted the papers and brought the packed bags. When my father-in-law saw them, he was shocked. "You've even packed your bags." I held the bags. My mother-in-law is also a part of my family, so I'll take responsibility and deliver her to her new place. I'll come to pick up Alicia's belongings soon, saying that. I loaded the bags into the car with Alicia and my mother-in-law. 2 hours later, we arrived at our destination. "You are right here. My father came out to greet us." When my mother-in-law expressed her wish to divorce, my father was there to give advice, suggesting that even though it was a bit far, she could work at his place since she had no attachment to her old place. She gratefully accepted his offer. My father had found an apartment nearby, and my mother-in-law moved in, starting her new life. Later, her divorce was finalized, and she received her fair share of the marital assets and alimony. She's now living a more vibrant life than before. Let's say, as for the father, he couldn't afford to pay the alimony and had to let go of the house. Eventually, his parents found out. Being disowned by his parents made his work life difficult, and he couldn't bear it, so he quit his once prized public servant job. He thought finding a new job would be easy, but he was rejected at every interview. He eventually got a job at a supermarket, but after causing trouble with a customer within a few days, he's now back to job hunting. Alicia and I are looking forward to our wedding next month. I never thought I'd reunite with my first love, let alone get married to her. It feels like a dream. I'm walking down the path of a happy life.